The big story, which is on most of the back pages, regards Saudi winning the World Cup bid to host the competition in 2034. Saudis win the World Cup, but the Express says FIFA hit winter own goal as only nation to bid gets 2034. Miguel, why are we not seeing any competition for these tournaments at the moment? This is a fairly new but increasingly common development, isn't it?
Well, I mean, and it's all the more notable given one of the reforms after the immense controversy. In fact, you'd probably say the controversy that shapes modern football in how Russia and Qatar were awarded the World Cups in 2010 for 2018 and 22. One of the reforms to be that it went from the executive committee, which was 24 officials and was seen as, I suppose, inherently corruptible because of the nature of it, to the transparency of all 211 member associations getting a vote. Except, OK, they'll get a vote, but that vote is just for one candidate. It's remarkable. The only kind of democracy that'll be shown here will be them ratifying a decision that nobody expects anyone to vote against. Further to that, it's difficult not to assess how the path to this World Cup has been constantly smoothed at every point for Saudi Arabia. First of all, because of FIFA's rotational rules, we could only have a World Cup in Asia or Oceania. So it couldn't go to North America or Central America because of 2026. It couldn't go to any of Europe, Africa, or anyone in South America because of this unprecedented Centenary World Cup in 2030, where for some reason South America was happy to take a mere 3 games just to celebrate the centenary. And then from that, FIFA's own rules now stated that for 2034, you needed 14 stadiums of a minimum 40,000. And that obviously this all had to be announced by today. Now, New Zealand and Australia together could only name 11 stadiums. So they had to get 3 in the space of 2 weeks. Naturally, and given also what felt like the weight of political will as more and more Asian nations rode in behind Saudi Arabia, Australia weren't going to get into another losing battle, as they did in 2010. And suddenly, at a time when, and this is a matter of fact, Gianni Infantino's relationship with Saudi Arabia is strengthening. In fact, for the Women's World Cup in Australia, one of the sponsorships was Visit Saudi that created a revolt from the players. But Saudi Arabia gets this World Cup that it's long wanted as part of Vision 2030. And it's remarkable. I think as much as anything, though, we're going to have all the same echoes that we had with Qatar, all the same issues, but on a much wider scale. But as much as anything, it says a lot about football governance. How come we in a situation where, from the story I did today about so many people in football being, alone, irritated about how it's going to cause another change to the calendar, as we saw with Qatar. But how can this decision be taken without, barely anyone being consulted? It's remarkable. And it does point to the issue of what is essentially an executive presidential role. Because as you pointed out, this is just another tournament where there's only one candidate. And similar, in many presidential elections across many confederations, there's only ever one candidate. Same with UEFA, so who should get some spotlight in this as well. But it does, as someone said to me today, it's everything wrong with football governance.
Well, back page of the Times, David, Saudi World Cup backlash, piece by Martin Ziegler. Saudi Arabia has been confirmed as the sole bidder for the 2034 World Cup, prompting criticism of FIFA from human rights organisations. Not that the human rights argument's passé, but because of Saudi's deep involvement in lots of sports, is it a relatively moot point at this stage, or do you expect Amnesty International, etc., to push hard on this point?
I'm sure they will push hard. We've seen Human Rights Watch come out with statements today as well, but it appears to just fall on deaf ears because FIFA are set in their ways, despite it being part of their sort of documentation and rules. I don't know if they have any intention of adhering to them because there doesn't appear to have been any particular due diligence. They may say to the contrary, but I'm not sure their answers on that would stand up to scrutiny on this because it appears to have been a fait accompli. Now, we saw what happened with Qatar and the human rights accusations and abuses around that tournament and the controversies in the build-up. This is going to be 11 years, you suspect, of similar scrutiny. But FIFA will plough on and they'll point to Western hypocrisy and the amount of deals that are being done by governments and companies with them. And also, if you look at the sporting landscape, from boxing, Tyson Fury last weekend, and the Live Golf series, tennis, entertainment, and plenty more besides, it's clear there's a direction of travel towards Saudi Arabia. We've got the Club World Cup coming up there, the Asia Cup in 2027. They're trying to invest heavily into sort of women's football as well, and dominate on that front too. There was a good piece in the Daily Telegraph by Sam Wallace pointing to Gianni Infantino's ever increasingly close relationship with Saudi Arabia and their crown prince, and it's part of this wider picture of FIFA against UEFA, and UEFA having the Champions League and the domestic competitions and the growth there and the revenues they bring in, and FIFA trying to fight back with this expanded Club World Cup. And if they have Gianni Infantino has a wealthy partner in Saudi Arabia, the return, the quid pro quo is perhaps bringing the World Cup there. And so maybe they should stop sort of making out that these are democratic bidding processes, and just admit that they're deciding where these tournaments are going on their own whim, really. And the rest of the world, whatever those protestations you mentioned from human rights groups, etc., and environmental groups when it comes to the previous World Cup, which is going to be across different continents, it doesn't seem to make much difference.
Yeah, 2030 across 3 continents, isn't it? Star headlines, Saudis net the big one, as you say, referring to the competition, I suppose, between the World Cup and the Champions League. Matthew Dunn reporting the Premier League will be forced into another winter break, Miguel, after Saudi Arabia was named as host to the 2034 World Cup. The expanded format, how difficult is it for any nation now to host this World Cup with 48 teams?
Well, I mean, this is probably why we'll see more multi-country bids. In fact, it was put to me today that it's still possible because, I mean, Saudi, as big a country it is geographically, it's 30 million people. They have a lot of infrastructure to build, which again will bring a lot of questions about migrant labour that we saw in Qatar. We could see more countries brought in. Egypt and Greece were already broached when they were thinking about going for 2030. But then, of course, the other side to this, I mean, it must be said, in the end, the mid-season break that Qatar caused ended up being more navigable than I think people expected, although it did still cause huge disruption to the season. It caused kind of planning changes years out. And while I say it's navigable, a lot of people in club football would be pretty apoplectic with this development. But even allowing for that, this is 48 teams, not 32. So that's got to require, at least an extra 2 weeks? It's an even greater upheaval. But again, it just points to how we're going to have all the same issues that we had with Qatar, or most of the same issues, but just on a far greater scale, particularly as regards migrant labour, human rights, who'll be able to attend the tournament, how football is politically used, and then, of course, the huge changes again. And it's another reason why the governance on this is so important, because who gets the World Cup? It's seen in football as still, despite the power of the Premier League, the most influential moment in a football cycle, because it dictates the next decade. And again, it's 11 years out from the tournament. Why this rush to do it now?